First up is Rent a Pal, which is an IFC Midnight release, so it's not necessarily aimed at as widestream an audience as other things, which is not a bad thing, right? I think that movies that embrace the genre they're from and know their audience tend to sometimes have a better chance of success. I think the thing that Rent a Pal does most successfully is that it kind of embraces a lot of the tropes of this sort of, it's not quite horror, it's a little more surreal, bizarro, niche type stuff. There wasn't anything spectacularly surprising, but I think it was well executed. This doesn't mean it's necessarily for me. I am not the target audience for this. I generally don't watch horror, and I don't think horror is the correct phrase still. It labels itself as mystery and suspense. I feel like it's a little more psychological maybe along those lines, but it's set in the 90s, and it's this guy who lives in his mother's basement who is, many of the things that you would imagine. His mother has dementia, and so he takes care of her, and he engages in those VHS dating services where you just record a tape and send it back and forth, and pre-Tinder and swiping type stuff for you kids out there. And then the weird thing happens when he finds a tape for a friend, a Rent-A-Pal one, where it's like, hey, and just sort of falls under the spell of it. And Brian Landis-Folkens plays the main character. And I think the sincerity with which he delivers some of his lines and performances and scenes really is what set this apart from being some sort of failed schlocky genre type thing. I think he brought such like a warmth to some of the moments that really elevated the entire film. And then the pal in the film is played by Will Wheaton, who I imagine he could have filmed it from home, basically. He's only sitting in this, he only exists in this TV. And I think he was pretty well cast in this, but I don't think it had to be Will Wheaton necessarily. But I thought the way that Brian Landis-Folkens played the main guy was just, like, there's this one scene where he's delivering his kind of spiel about, why you should date him. And it was just so sweet and sincere. And he just turned it on. And I was like, wow, okay, that's acting. Like, that's good acting. It's not acting that where you can see them being like, I want an Oscar acting. It's just like, oh, wow. This is a person who is emoting in a way that like a character would really be feeling. It feels genuine, but it's obviously he's an actor portraying this. So I thought that was a wonderful example, but the rest of the film, is a little uneven. It doesn't quite hold up to that. That being said, for someone who doesn't necessarily watch these films, it wasn't so freaky and scary that I couldn't watch it, but also I really truly am not the target audience for it. I think overall, if you're an IFC Midnight fan, it's a good choice. It's a decent choice, but for me, it was, but I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5. And then the other things I wanted to talk about super briefly are The Boys are back on Amazon Prime, and this was one of my favorite shows when it came out. I thought it was spectacular. I'm so glad it's back for a second season. I didn't realize that it's only coming out in, they released the first 3 episodes at once, and then it's coming out weekly. And it's a very strange thing to have to wait for content, especially in this weird quarantine time where I'm like, give me the content, give me the new stuff. And I was so excited for it, but I was like, I think I forgot everything from season 1. So I went back and watched season 1 again. And some of the stuff in season 1 is just even more relevant now that we're living in this bizarro world that we're living in terms of, the authoritarian power and just, people just being corrupt and not being stood up to. And it resonated even more now than it did then. So I actually, if you haven't picked up The Boys season 2 yet, go back, watch season 1, but if you were already watching it, watch it again and then watch season 2. It's just so weird. And the premise is, it's basically if superheroes were run by corporations, right, and had marketing teams, and basically if Disney ran actual superheroes as opposed to their fictional MCU or DC or whatever it was, and the characters are just like, there's one super patriotic, one Homelander, and that guy, he just does such a good job of the Captain America, but a psychopath. It's Carl Urban, it's Jack Quaid, it's Jesse T. Usher, it's Elizabeth Shue, Anthony Starr plays Homelander. I think he does such a good job, and then Aya Cash joins season 2, which I think is a great addition. I just want to shout out Karen Fukuhara. Does not say anything at all. And also you want to talk about acting, just like such a good actor in it, just emoting without having dialogue. It's so impressive. Giancarlo Esposito joined season 2 more prominently. It was really exciting. I'm like, what is he not in these days? Like, he is doing so well on TV or streaming or whatever you want to call it. But The Boys, Amazon Prime, absolutely check it out. And then the last thing I'm watching right now, which is also coming out weekly, which is really hooking me, is The Vow on HBO, and it's a documentary series, and it takes a look at the NXIVM cult, and it's definitely a cult. And the way that they just sucked in all of these not super prominent, but relatively prominent people in addition to civilians. And there's this whole crazy, there's a whole sex side of it. It's definitely like any sort of multi-level marketing thing. It reminds me very much of Scientology. And the guy who started it is this guy, Keith Raniere. And the way he convinces people that he's this crazy mega genius. It's the type of stuff where if you wrote fiction about it, you'd be like, oh, this is too absurd. But then you watch it play out as an actual documentary where it's just like, wow, these people are bonkers. And I remember hearing vaguely about the cult when Allison Mack got busted for racketeering charges in last year in 2019. And I was like, what's going on here? Like, Allison Mack was in a sex cult? Okay. And then just didn't look too much into it. And then watching this now, I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. And sex cult is kind of scratching the surface of how complicated the brainwashing was, but that is an aspect of it. But Allison Mack, a bunch of people from Battlestar Galactica, which is a show I absolutely love, Kristen Kruk, whose name I'm mispronouncing, I'm so sorry. Anyway, this is also coming out in weeks, and every time it ends, I'm just like, I want to watch more. But what happens? What absolutely happens? Like, I really want to know. Please tell me what happens. So The Vow on HBO, absolutely worth a watch.